Anna's life was a portrait of wealth and privilege. Growing up in an opulent mansion surrounded by grand gardens and marble halls, she had everything one could dream of, except freedom. Her family, particularly her parents, treated her life as a carefully planned strategy. To them, Anna was not a person but an asset, a piece in a larger game of alliances and wealth preservation. Her days were filled with tailored etiquette classes, high-profile social gatherings, and constant reminders of her responsibilities to the family name. Her parents' plans for her future revolved around one thing: marrying into an even wealthier family. They frequently discussed potential suitors, often reducing these men to their financial worth and political influence. Anna's wishes and dreams were irrelevant. To them, love was a frivolity, unnecessary, and impractical. Beneath the polished exterior of a perfect daughter, Anna's heart yearned for something more. She wasn't content to be a pawn in her parents' games. She had dreams of her own, dreams of independence, of being valued for her mind and abilities rather than her last name. She wanted to step out of the shadow of her family's legacy and create a life where she could make her own choices. The final straw came during a dinner party. Her parents introduced her to a wealthy businessman twice her age, making it clear that they expected her to entertain the idea of marriage. Sitting at the grand dining table, surrounded by chandeliers and whispers of alliances, Anna felt suffocated. That night, as she stared at her reflection in the gilded mirror of her bedroom, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She would leave. Anna spent the next few weeks quietly preparing for her departure. She gathered cash, packed a simple bag with essentials, and carefully studied job listings online. One advertisement caught her attention: housemaid needed for a private estate. No experience required. It was perfect. It offered anonymity, a way to disappear from her old life, and the chance to start over. On the night of her escape, Anna slipped out of the mansion under the cover of darkness. She left behind a note, not for her parents, but for the staff who had been kinder to her than her own family. Thank you for everything. I'm starting a new chapter. Please don't try to find me. Boarding a train to a distant city, Anna felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, she was free from the gilded cage of her family's expectations, free to carve out her own destiny. She arrived in the bustling city just as the sun began to rise, her simple bag slung over her shoulder and hope flickering in her heart. Her new life was about to begin. The private estate loomed large as Anna approached, her heart pounding with a mix of nervousness and determination. The wrought iron gates creaked open, revealing a vast property with perfectly manicured lawns, a sparkling fountain in the center of the driveway, and an imposing stone mansion that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. Anna clutched her modest bag tightly, feeling dwarfed by the grandeur of her new workplace. She was greeted by Mrs. Hughes, the head housekeeper, whose stern expression and clipped tone immediately set the tone for what was expected of her. "You're late," Mrs. Hughes said, her eyes scanning Anna's simple attire with a hint of disapproval. Anna apologized softly, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat, and followed Mrs. Hughes inside. The interior of the mansion was even more overwhelming than the exterior. High ceilings adorned with intricate chandeliers, polished marble floors that echoed with every step, and walls lined with priceless artwork. It was a world far removed from her current position as a maid. Yet, Anna reminded herself, this was exactly what she wanted: anonymity and a chance to prove herself on her own terms. As Mrs. Hughes walked her through the grand hallways, Anna's eyes couldn't help but wander. The staff moved efficiently, each person focused on their tasks, but the air was thick with an unspoken tension. "Keep your head down and do your work," Mrs. Hughes instructed. "Mr. Blake does not tolerate incompetence." The mention of Ethan Blake sent a ripple of curiosity through Anna. She had heard whispers about him during her job search. A self-made billionaire, Ethan was known for his sharp business acumen and equally sharp tongue. People spoke of him with a mixture of admiration and fear. As if on cue, the sound of measured footsteps filled the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. Anna turned her head just as Ethan Blake came into view. He was taller than she had imagined, his presence commanding without effort. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly combed back, Ethan's sharp jawline and piercing gray eyes gave him an aura of authority that made the staff freeze in his presence. He didn't speak as he passed, but his gaze briefly landed on Anna, assessing her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "That's Mr. Blake," Mrs. Hughes whispered, her tone carrying both reverence and caution. "You'll do well to stay out of his way." Ethan's demeanor was as cold as the rumors suggested. His interaction with the staff was minimal but efficient. He issued orders with a curt nod or a single word, and no one dared question him. Yet, despite his aloofness, there was something about him that intrigued Anna. Perhaps it was the way his eyes seemed to carry the weight of unspoken burdens, or the fleeting moment when his gaze softened as he paused to adjust a photograph on the wall, a snapshot of what appeared to be a younger Ethan with an older woman, likely his mother. As the day progressed, Anna threw herself into her duties, determined to avoid drawing any attention. Cleaning the vast rooms, polishing silverware, and organizing the kitchen pantry became her focus. But no matter how much she tried to blend in, she couldn't shake the feeling of Ethan's gaze following her whenever their paths crossed. Was it suspicion? Curiosity? She couldn't tell, and it both unnerved and fascinated her. By the end of the day, as Anna collapsed onto the small cot in her modest quarters, she couldn't help but replay the events in her mind. The mansion, the staff, and most of all, Ethan Blake. Everything about this place was a stark contrast to her former life. Yet, for the first time, she felt a spark of excitement. This was her new beginning, and she was determined to make it work, no matter how daunting it seemed. As Anna settled into her role, whispers among the staff began to paint a more detailed picture of Ethan Blake's life. She overheard fragments of conversations in the kitchen and hallways, hushed tones discussing a failed engagement that had left him bitter, or a family tragedy that had hardened his demeanor. The pieces didn't form a complete picture, but they hinted at a man whose cold exterior was a shield for deeper wounds. "He wasn't always like this," one of the older maids whispered during a coffee break. "Used to be kind, even charming, but something changed after." She trailed off, glancing around nervously as if afraid to say more. Anna, listening quietly in the corner, felt her curiosity deepen. What could have happened to transform someone so brilliant and successful into a man who seemed so isolated? It wasn't long before Anna had her first direct interaction with Ethan. She was dusting the grand library, carefully avoiding the rare books that lined the shelves, when she felt his presence behind her. "You missed a spot," his voice cut through the silence, sharp but not unkind. Startled, Anna turned to see him standing in the doorway, his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on her work. "I'm sorry, sir." "I'll take care of it," she replied quickly, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Be thorough," he said finally before turning and walking away. The interaction lasted only a few seconds, but it left Anna unsettled. There was something in his tone, not just authority, but a trace of weariness, as if he was tired of having to point out the flaws in everything around him. From that moment, Anna began to notice more about Ethan. He moved through the mansion like a ghost, always observing but rarely engaging. His interactions with the staff were curt, and yet there were moments when his guard seemed to slip. She saw him late one night in the garden, standing alone and staring at the stars, his usually rigid posture softened by whatever thoughts consumed him. Anna couldn't shake her growing fascination. Ethan Blake was a puzzle, and she found herself wanting to understand him, even as she reminded herself to keep her distance. After all, she had her own secrets to protect. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan had seen his fair share of capable individuals, but the new addition to his team, Anna, was an enigma. She had been with them for only a week, yet her presence had a quiet but undeniable impact. She wasn't loud or overly assertive, but her movements spoke of precision, her words carefully chosen and deliberate. It was as though she knew exactly where she stood, and it wasn't beneath anyone. Ethan, always the observer, noticed the subtle ways Anna worked. She had taken one glance at the chaotic operations board, cluttered with color-coded notes and barely legible timelines, and within minutes, she was reorganizing it. Each task was assigned a logical priority, the timelines recalibrated to reflect real-world constraints rather than optimistic ideals. She didn't ask for permission or seek validation. She simply acted, her fingers moving quickly across the board. By the time she was done, everyone in the room had stopped to watch, but Anna seemed utterly unfazed. She just rewrote the entire strategy, one of the analysts murmured under their breath. Ethan didn't respond, but kept his eyes on Anna. Most newcomers would have hesitated, seeking approval or avoiding stepping on anyone's toes. Anna had done neither. It wasn't arrogance, it was efficiency. She didn't waste time second-guessing herself. Interesting, Ethan thought, leaning back in his chair. As the meeting progressed, the group settled into the revised structure Anna had created. It worked seamlessly, much to everyone's surprise, but the real test came when the conversation turned heated. A debate broke out about resource allocation, a sensitive topic that always ignited tempers. Ethan had made his position clear earlier, firmly believing that the team's focus should shift to the southern corridor. But when Anna raised her hand to interject, a quiet stillness spread across the room. Actually, I don't think reallocating everything to the southern corridor is the most effective strategy, she began, her voice calm but firm. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as he straightened in his chair. Really? His tone was cool, almost dismissive. And what would you suggest, Anna? There was a subtle challenge. Ethan had seen countless people crumble under that tone, eager to please or unwilling to challenge authority. But Anna didn't falter. With respect, I've reviewed the intel, and while the southern corridor is important, it's not as critical as you're projecting. Diversionary pressure on the northern front will destabilize the opposition's supply lines and buy us time to consolidate elsewhere. A single-point focus will leave us vulnerable if they decide to counterstrike. Her gaze didn't waver, even as the tension in the room thickened. It wasn't just her words that caught Ethan off guard, it was her tone. She wasn't offensive or brash. She wasn't trying to prove herself. She simply presented the facts as she saw them, with a confidence that left no room for doubt. For a moment, silence stretched across the room. Ethan studied her, his piercing gaze searching for hesitation or uncertainty, but he found none. And you're confident about this? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost testing. Yes, Anna replied simply. Confident enough to stake the outcome of this operation on it. A murmur swept through the room, but Ethan held up a hand to silence it. His eyes never left Anna, a faint glint of curiosity replacing the initial edge in his demeanor. All right, he said finally, leaning forward. We'll run with it, your way. But if this fails... It won't, she interrupted, her voice steady. Ethan's lips twitched ever so slightly, the closest he ever came to a smile. The meeting continued, the tension gradually dissipating, but the interaction lingered in Ethan's mind. Anna wasn't just intelligent. She had the kind of quiet strength that didn't rely on bravado. She held her ground without making a scene, her calm defiance more powerful than any raised voice could be. As the team dispersed, Ethan stayed behind for a moment, glancing at the newly organized board. He didn't say a word, but a flicker of something, respect, perhaps, passed through his expression. Anna, unaware of the impression she had left, returned to her desk. But for Ethan, the day had shifted in a way he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't often someone surprised him, and Anna had done it twice in less than an hour. For the first time in a long while, Ethan found himself intrigued. The dining room of the Bellwether Club was aglow with understated opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm light over the carefully arranged tables, and the soft hum of classical music filled the air. This was Ethan's domain, a setting where power wasn't displayed through brute force but in subtleties, an impeccable suit, a well-chosen wine, the ability to steer a conversation to a decisive conclusion. Tonight's dinner was no exception. Seated around the table were executives, decision-makers, and potential investors. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a carefully orchestrated opportunity to solidify alliances and close deals that had been months in the making. Ethan, as usual, was in control, his charm and sharp intellect holding the room effortlessly. Anna, seated a few chairs away, wasn't part of the main conversation. She had been invited as a courtesy, an acknowledgement of her recent contributions, though her role tonight was largely observational. She didn't seem to mind. Dressed in an understated black dress that matched the evening's elegance, she listened attentively, her gaze moving between speakers, taking in every detail. Everything was running smoothly until it wasn't. It started subtly, a flicker of discomfort in one of the executives' expressions as they glanced at the glass in their hand. Another followed suit, their brow furrowing. Ethan noticed immediately, his sharp eyes catching the hesitation as one of the investors, a man named Connors, leaned toward the waiter to murmur something. Ethan's finely tuned instincts told him something was wrong. He excused himself from the conversation momentarily and signaled discreetly to the maitre d'. "What's going on?" Ethan asked in a low voice, his tone calm but firm. The maitre d' looked mortified. "I deeply apologize, sir, but there seems to have been a mix-up with the wine. The bottle served to your table was mislabeled. It's not the vintage on the menu." Ethan's jaw tightened ever so slightly. This was more than a simple error. In a room where details mattered more than anything, it was a potential disaster. Connors was a known connoisseur, someone whose opinion on such matters carried weight. If this mistake wasn't handled delicately, it could derail the entire evening. As Ethan turned back to the table, ready to salvage the situation, Anna rose quietly and approached him. "Let me handle it," she said softly, her voice steady. Ethan hesitated. Anna wasn't part of the dinner's inner workings, and while she'd proven herself sharp, this was different. But there was something in her expression, a quiet confidence that made him pause. "All right," he said finally, stepping back. "The floor is yours." Anna walked to the table with an ease that seemed almost natural, as if she'd done this 100 times before. "Gentlemen," she began, her tone smooth and assured, "I hope you don't mind me interrupting, but I noticed some concern about the wine selection." Connors, his initial irritation evident, raised an eyebrow. "It's not what was listed on the menu." "You're absolutely right," Anna replied without missing a beat, "and I must apologize for the oversight. But I think you'll find that this particular vintage, while unexpected, carries its own unique story, a story I believe aligns with the theme of tonight's conversation, adaptability." Her words immediately caught their attention. She reached for the bottle and held it up, her posture poised. This is a rare blend from a smaller vineyard in Tuscany. They faced a series of challenges during the harvest, drought, early frost, but instead of scrapping the year's production, they adapted. The result is this bottle, a wine that, while unconventional, has gained recognition for its depth and complexity. Connors leaned back slightly, intrigued despite himself. Anna poured a small amount into his glass and said, "I invite you to try it with an open mind. If it doesn't meet your expectations, I'll personally ensure another selection is brought out. But I think you'll find that sometimes the unexpected can surpass the planned." Ethan watched from the sidelines, equal parts impressed and curious. Anna had completely turned the situation around, not with apologies or excuses, but with a narrative that reframed the error as an opportunity. Connors sipped the wine, his expression softening as he tasted it. "Well," he said after a pause, "you might be onto something. This is quite good." A ripple of agreement passed through the table as the other guests followed suit, their initial skepticism melting away. The tension that had threatened to derail the evening dissipated, and the conversation returned to its lively, focused rhythm. Ethan approached Anna as she stepped away from the table, his voice low. "That was impressive." She glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Just doing what needed to be done." "Not everyone would have thought to spin the situation like that," Ethan said, studying her carefully. "You handled it like someone who's been in high-pressure rooms before." Anna shrugged slightly, her demeanor unassuming. "I've picked up a few things along the way." It wasn't much of an answer, and Ethan knew it. But he also knew better than to press her in the moment. Instead, he stored the information away, adding another layer to the growing puzzle that was Anna. As the dinner progressed, Ethan found his thoughts drifting back to her. She had stepped into a potentially disastrous situation with composure and turned it around with creativity and tact. It wasn't just intelligence, it was a kind of poise that spoke of experience, of someone who understood the subtle art of influence. By the time the evening concluded, the deals Ethan had planned to secure were all but finalized. The guests left satisfied, the wine incident long forgotten, replaced by praise for the evening's success. Ethan lingered in the dining room, watching as Anna spoke briefly with one of the waitstaff before slipping out quietly. He knew she wasn't one to boast or draw attention to herself, but tonight had revealed something about her, something he intended to uncover. As he walked out into the cool night air, Ethan couldn't help but feel that Anna wasn't just another team member. She was something much more. And the more he saw of her, the more he wanted to know. The office had quieted as the day wore on, the hum of activity fading into the software of computers and the faint shuffle of papers. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the dim light from his desk lamp casting sharp shadows across his face. His attention wasn't on the report in front of him, though it was on Anna. She was seated a few desks away, immersed in a spreadsheet, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had a way of working that was both methodical and creative, as if she saw angles others missed. In the weeks since she had joined the team, she'd proven herself capable, far more capable than her position required. Ethan, ever the strategist, couldn't resist testing those capabilities further. He stood, crossing the room with deliberate steps, and dropped a file onto her desk. Anna glanced up, her eyes flicking to the folder and then to him, her expression neutral. "This isn't in my remit," she said after a pause, flipping the file open. Her tone wasn't defensive, just matter-of-fact. "Consider it an expansion," Ethan replied, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "The logistics for the upcoming presentation need fine-tuning. I want your input." Anna's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to gauge his intent. "Don't you have a logistics team for this?" "I do," Ethan said smoothly, "but I want a fresh perspective." "Yours?" Anna hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the folder. She wasn't naive. She knew Ethan was testing her. But what unsettled her wasn't the task itself. It was the way he looked at her, as though he was trying to unravel her, layer by layer. "I'll see what I can do," she said finally, her voice steady. "Good," Ethan said, already turning to leave. "I'll need it by tomorrow morning." Over the next few days, Ethan's tests became more frequent and more demanding. He assigned Anna tasks that required her to think beyond the confines of her role, drafting proposals, reanalyzing datasets, even contributing ideas during high-stakes meetings. She handled each challenge with an unflappable calm that impressed him, but it also made him curious. Who was she, really? Where had she learned to navigate pressure with such ease? For her part, Anna maintained a professional distance. She was polite but reserved, keeping conversations strictly work-related and steering clear of personal details. It wasn't that she didn't notice Ethan's growing interest. She just didn't want to encourage it. But then the personal crisis happened. It was late when Anna noticed the shift. Ethan, who was usually composed and in control, seemed distracted, his sharp focus dulled by something heavier. He lingered in the corner of the office, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and strained. When he hung up, he stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then, without a word, he grabbed his coat and headed toward the elevator. Anna watched him go, her curiosity piqued despite herself. She told herself it wasn't her business, but as the hours ticked by and Ethan didn't return, a strange unease settled over her. It wasn't until much later, when she was packing up to leave, that she found him. He was in the break room, sitting on one of the couches with his head in his hands. "Ethan," she said cautiously, stepping inside. He looked up, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed vulnerable. His usual mask of control was gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. "Everything okay?" she asked, keeping her tone gentle. Ethan hesitated, clearly debating whether to brush her off. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's my father," he admitted finally. "He's in the hospital. The doctors aren't optimistic." Anna's chest tightened. She hadn't expected that. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Ethan nodded, his gaze distant. He's not an easy man to deal with. We've had our differences, but he trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. Anna hesitated, torn between respecting his privacy and wanting to help. In the end, she crossed the room and sat down beside him. For what it's worth, she said, I've seen how you handle people, how you fight for what you believe in. If your father is anything like you, I'm sure he knows how much you care, even if things have been complicated. Ethan looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. You barely know me, he said, his voice quieter now. Anna shrugged. Maybe. But I know enough to see that you don't let things slide. You care about your work, your team. It's not hard to imagine that extends to your family too. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Then Ethan spoke again. Thank you, he said, his voice steadier now. For staying. For saying that. Anna met his gaze, and for the first time, she saw something she hadn't expected. Gratitude, yes, but also a deep vulnerability that he rarely let anyone see. She nodded, rising to her feet. Let me know if there's anything I can do, she said. As she left the room, Ethan watched her go, his thoughts a whirlwind. He had always prided himself on keeping his personal and professional lives separate, but Anna had crossed that boundary tonight. She had seen him at his weakest, and instead of recoiling, she had offered him quiet strength. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. The next day, things returned to normal, or as normal as they could be. Ethan was back to his usual composed self, but his interactions with Anna carried a new undertone. He was more attentive, more thoughtful, as though seeing her in a new light. Anna, for her part, continued to maintain her distance, but even she couldn't ignore the subtle shift between them. The emotional tension was undeniable, and no matter how much she tried to downplay it, it lingered in every glance, every exchange. For Ethan, it was becoming clear that Anna wasn't just another team member. She was someone who had seen beyond the walls he so carefully maintained, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he wanted to rebuild them. The soft glow of the desk lamp bathed Anna's face as she sat alone in her apartment. The papers in front of her were untouched, her thoughts far from the numbers and charts she was supposed to review. She ran a hand through her hair, leaning back in her chair as her mind raced. For weeks now, she had been walking a tightrope, balancing her growing connection to Ethan against the secret she had sworn to keep. Every glance he gave her, every moment of unexpected vulnerability, pulled her closer to the edge of revealing too much. She couldn't afford that. The stakes weren't just personal, they were monumental. If Ethan discovered the truth about her background, about who she really was, it would shatter the fragile sense of purpose she had built for herself. Worse, it would change how he looked at her, and that thought was unbearable. Anna closed her eyes, her mind slipping into the memories she tried so hard to bury. She was back in the opulent halls of her family's estate, the marble floors gleaming under the chandelier's light. Her parents' voices echoed through the vast rooms, sharp and commanding as they spoke of alliances, reputations, and responsibilities. You were born into privilege, Anna, her father would say, his tone always laced with expectation. Don't squander it. Everything we've built depends on you understanding your place. Her place. That was the phrase they used to define her, to keep her within the gilded cage of their expectations. She was the daughter of wealth and influence, groomed from a young age to navigate the elite world of power brokers and politicians. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, was scrutinized. But it wasn't the life she wanted. Anna remembered the day she left, the way her mother's voice had trembled, not with sadness, but with cold fury. You're throwing away everything, she had said, her words like ice. I'm finding my own path, Anna had replied, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. That path had led her here, far from the shadow of her family's influence. But no matter how much distance she put between herself and her past, she could still feel its weight pressing down on her, a constant reminder that the life she had chosen was built on a foundation of secrets. The buzz of her phone pulled her out of her reverie. Anna glanced at the screen. A message from Ethan. Late night at the office. Care for some company? No work talk, promise. Her lips twitched into a faint smile before she caught herself. She shouldn't be smiling. She shouldn't even be considering this. But the truth was, Ethan had a way of disarming her. He saw things in her she wasn't ready to see in herself. Strength, intelligence, even vulnerability. Against her better judgment, she replied,
Sure.
I'll bring coffee. When Anna arrived at the office, Ethan was sitting on the edge of his desk, his tie loosened, and his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, but there was a warmth in his expression when he saw her. You didn't have to come, he said as she handed him a coffee. I didn't have anything better to do, she replied, trying to keep her tone light. They sat in silence for a while, the city lights casting patterns on the walls. Anna felt the tension ease slightly, the quiet between them more comfortable than she expected. You ever feel like you can't trust anyone? Ethan's voice broke the silence, and Anna turned to look at him. The question caught her off guard, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in his tone. Sometimes, she admitted carefully. Ethan chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. I've spent my whole life being cautious, questioning people's motives, wondering if they're with me because of who I am or what I can give them. It gets exhausting. Anna swallowed hard, his words hitting closer to home than she cared to admit. She wanted to tell him she understood, that she knew exactly what it felt like to be defined by expectations and status. But she couldn't, not without unraveling everything she'd worked so hard to hide. Instead, she said, it must be lonely. Ethan looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. It is, he said quietly. But it's easier than the alternative. What's the alternative? Getting hurt. The honesty in his voice made her heart ache. She wanted to tell him he didn't have to keep everyone at arm's length, that not everyone would betray his trust. But how could she say that when she was doing the exact same thing? Anna turned away, her grip tightening on her coffee cup. She had to keep her distance. Letting Ethan get too close wasn't just risky, it was dangerous. But then he spoke again, his voice softer now. You're different, Anna, he said. I don't know what it is, but you don't feel like someone I have to keep my guard up around. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Anna felt her chest tighten, a mix of guilt and longing twisting inside her. He didn't know the truth, and that truth would shatter the fragile trust they were beginning to build. I should go, she said abruptly, standing before he could see the conflict in her eyes. Ethan frowned but didn't stop her. Thanks for coming, he said instead. Anna nodded, her heart pounding as she walked away. She could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't look back. That night, as she lay awake in her bed, Anna stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a whirlwind. Ethan was getting too close, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep her secret. But even as fear gnawed at her, a small part of her wanted to let him in, to trust him with the truth. It was a dangerous line to walk, but for the first time in years, Anna wasn't sure she wanted to walk it alone. The grand hall of the conference center buzzed with energy, the air electric with the hum of negotiations and polished small talk. It was one of those rare events where powerful players across industries gathered, their conversations veiled in diplomacy, each handshake a subtle play in an ongoing game of power. Ethan, as always, commanded attention, his presence magnetic, his sharp gaze darting between conversations and calculations. Anna was there, too, blending seamlessly into the background as she always did, quietly observing, her keen mind absorbing everything. But tonight, she wasn't just another member of Ethan's team. There was something different about her, a tension in her posture, as though she were bracing for a storm no one else could see. The storm came faster than expected. It began with a voice, a sharp, cutting interruption that sliced through the polite hum of the room like a knife. Fascinating to see you here, Miss Lancaster. Anna froze, the blood draining from her face. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting those of a man standing near the bar, his smirk cold and calculated. Gerald Marks, a rival business associate with a reputation for ruthlessness. He held a glass of wine in one hand, but the way he looked at Anna made it clear that his weapon of choice tonight wasn't the drink, but the information he held. Ethan, standing a few steps away, turned at the sound of the name. His brow furrowed. Lancaster, he repeated, his sharp eyes narrowing on Anna. What's he talking about? Anna opened her mouth, but no words came out. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of her secret suffocating her. Oh, she didn't tell you? Gerald's voice dripped with mock surprise. Allow me to enlighten you, Ethan. Your trusted confidant here isn't who she claims to be. Anna Lancaster, daughter of the Lancaster dynasty, one of the most influential families in finance. They're practically royalty in their circles. And here she is working incognito under you. Strange, isn't it? The room went deathly silent, all eyes snapping to Anna. The whispers started almost immediately, a ripple of shock and speculation spreading through the crowd. Ethan's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he turned to Anna. Is it true? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Anna's heart raced, her mind scrambling for an answer, but there was no escaping it now. Ethan,
Is it
true? He interrupted, his voice rising. Yes, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan took a step back, his expression a mix of fury and betrayal. All this time, he said, his voice trembling with barely restrained anger. You've been lying to me. To everyone.
Why?
What's your angle? What are you even doing here? Anna shook her head, her composure fracturing. It's not what you think. I wasn't sent here to save it, Ethan snapped. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what this is? You're a Lancaster. Your family's been playing this game for decades. So, what's your play, Anna? Were you spying on me? Trying to undercut my business? No, she said, her voice breaking. I left that life behind. I didn't want any part of it. That's why I came here, to prove I could be more than just their puppet. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You expect me to believe that? After all the lies, after hiding who you really are? Anna's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she forced herself to stand tall. I didn't tell you because I wanted a chance to be judged for who I am, not for my name. I wasn't sent here to hurt you, Ethan. Everything I've done, it's been for this team, for the work we're doing. Work, he repeated, his voice full of disdain. You've been manipulating me this entire time, gaining my trust, learning my weaknesses. And for what? To prove something to yourself. The accusation cut deeper than she expected, and for a moment, Anna couldn't breathe. She looked at him, at the man who had started to mean more to her than she ever thought possible, and saw nothing but anger and hurt staring back at her. This wasn't manipulation, she said softly, her voice trembling. I never lied about the things that mattered. I never lied about how much I care about this, about you. Ethan flinched at her words, his jaw tightening further. You don't get to do that, he said coldly. You don't get to make this about feelings when you've been lying to my face since the day we met. Anna took a shaky breath, willing herself to hold it together. I understand why you're angry, she said. I don't expect you to forgive me. But you know me, Ethan. You know who I am beyond my name. Don't let Gerald or anyone else define me for you. Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of doubt, a crack in the wall of his fury. But then he turned away. I can't do this right now, he said, his voice low and strained. Get out, Anna. She felt the weight of his words like a physical blow, but she nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As she walked out of the hall, the whispers followed her, but she kept her head high, refusing to let them see how much she was breaking inside. When the doors closed behind her, Anna leaned against the wall, her breaths coming in short, uneven gasps. The truth was out now, and it had shattered everything she had tried to build. Inside the hall, Ethan stood frozen, staring at the spot where Anna had been moments ago. Gerald approached him, his smug smile firmly in place. You're welcome, he said, raising his glass. Now you know who you're really dealing with. But Ethan didn't respond. His anger was still fresh, but beneath it, a seed of doubt had taken root. As much as he wanted to believe Anna had been playing him, a part of him couldn't shake the sincerity in her voice, the look in her eyes when she said she cared. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know what to believe, and that terrified him. The night outside was cold and unforgiving, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled in Anna's chest. She stood in the dimly lit foyer of Ethan's mansion, her hands clenched to her sides, willing herself not to cry. Not here. Not yet. Ethan was pacing across the room like a caged animal, his every step punctuated by frustration. His jaw was tight, his hands flexing into fists and then releasing as if he couldn't decide whether to lash out or let go. "Why?" he demanded finally, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? Was it fun for you? Watching me trust you, knowing you were lying the whole time?" Anna flinched at his tone, but she stood her ground, her voice quiet but steady. "It wasn't like that, Ethan. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "Then what were you trying to do, Anna? Enlighten me, because right now it looks an awful lot like manipulation." The accusation stung, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I didn't tell you because I was scared," she admitted. "Scared that if you knew my name, you wouldn't see me for who I really am. You'd see the Lancasters, their wealth, their influence, their expectations, and you'd assume I was just another spoiled daughter playing at being useful. And were you?" Ethan shot back, his voice low and dangerous. "No," she said firmly, her eyes blazing. "I left that life behind, Ethan. I walked away from all of it, my family, their money, their control, because I wanted to prove I could do something on my own, that I could be more than just a name on a trust fund." Ethan stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "And you thought lying was the way to do that?" "I didn't lie," Anna said, her voice trembling now. "I just didn't tell you everything. Because for once, I wanted to be judged for my work, not my last name. Do you have any idea what it's like to walk into every room and know that people see your family before they see you? To know they've already made up their minds about who you are?" Ethan's expression softened for a fraction of a second, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "You had every chance to tell me, Anna. Every single chance. And you didn't." Anna felt her control slipping, her emotions boiling to the surface despite her best efforts. "You don't get it," she said, her voice rising. "I didn't tell you because I was finally starting to feel like I belonged here. Like I was earning something real for the first time in my life. And then you made me feel like I mattered. Not because of who I'm related to, but because of who I am." Ethan stared at her, his anger wavering under the weight of her words. But the betrayal was still there, lingering like a shadow. "You should have trusted me," he said quietly. Anna let out a bitter laugh, the sound tinged with pain. "Trusted you? You, who keeps everyone at arm's length. Who never lets anyone see what's behind that perfect, controlled facade. Tell me, Ethan, when have you ever trusted someone enough to let them see all of you?" The words hit their mark, and Ethan's expression hardened. "That's not the same," he said through clenched teeth. "It's exactly the same," Anna shot back. "You and I, we're more alike than you want to admit. We both carry things we don't know how to share. But the difference is I was willing to try. I was willing to let you in." Ethan's gaze dropped, his fists clenching at his sides. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of their uneven breathing. "I never meant to hurt you," Anna said finally, her voice soft now, almost a whisper.
"But I see now that I did.
And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "But you need to ask yourself something, Ethan. Is this anger about what I did, or is it about the fact that I got close enough to hurt you in the first place?" Ethan didn't answer. His silence was louder than any words could have been, and Anna felt her heart break a little more. "I care about you," she said, her voice trembling. "More than I should, maybe. But I can't stay here, Ethan. Not if you can't trust me. Not if you can't see me for who I am, not just who you think I should be." She turned toward the door, her footsteps heavy, her chest tight. She had almost reached it when Ethan's voice stopped her. "Anna." She froze, her heart leaping in spite of herself. But when she turned back, the look on his face told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't ready. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said, his voice barely audible. Anna nodded, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. "I hope you do, too," she said softly. And then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a finality that left Ethan standing in the silence, the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. For the first time in years, he felt truly alone, and for the first time, he realized it was a choice he didn't want to make anymore. The mansion was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that pressed heavily against the walls and amplified every creak of the floorboards. Ethan sat in his study, the amber glow of the desk lamp illuminating the glass of whiskey in his hand. He swirled the liquid absently, his mind far from the room he was in. Anna's words replayed in his head, over and over, like a broken record. I wanted to be judged for who I am, not my name. You made me feel like I mattered. Is this anger about what I did, or about the fact that I got close enough to hurt you? Her voice haunted him, each phrase cutting deeper than the last. Ethan had prided himself on being a man who saw through people, who could anticipate motives and intentions before they even knew them themselves. But with Anna, he had missed something, a truth he hadn't wanted to admit. He took a sip of whiskey, the burn in his throat doing little to dull the ache in his chest. How could he have been so blind? How could he have let her in so far without realizing it? His mind conjured images of her, unbidden but vivid. The way she had effortlessly reorganized the chaos of his operations board during her first week, her calm efficiency catching his attention. The business dinner where she had turned an impending disaster into an opportunity, her quick thinking saving the night. The late nights in the office, where she had challenged his ideas, made him think differently, and, without him realizing it, made him better. And that moment in the break room, when she had seen him at his most vulnerable and stayed, offering quiet strength without judgment. He had let himself believe she was different, because she was. But now, doubt clouded everything, turning every memory into a question mark. Was she genuine, or had it all been a calculated act? A knock at the study door broke his thoughts. Ethan looked up as Marcus, his longtime confidant and chief advisor, stepped into the room. "You've been in here all night," Marcus said, his tone gentle but laced with concern. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Not in the mood for a lecture, Marcus." "Good," Marcus replied, settling into the chair opposite Ethan. "Because I'm not here to lecture. I'm here to figure out why you're sulking like a man who just lost something important." Ethan's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the glass in his hand. "You heard what happened." Marcus nodded. "I heard enough to know you're angry. But I've known you long enough to see that it's more than that. So, why don't you tell me what's really going on?" For a moment, Ethan didn't speak. Then, with a heavy exhale, he set the glass down and ran a hand through his hair. "She lied to me, Marcus. She let me trust her, let me believe she was one thing, and the whole time, she was hiding the truth." Marcus tilted his head, studying Ethan carefully. "And what truth is that? That her last name is Lancaster? That she grew up in privilege?" Ethan's eyes snapped to Marcus, irritation flaring. "It's not just about her name. It's about the fact that she didn't tell me. She made me believe," he trailed off, the words tangling in his throat. "Made you believe what?" Marcus pressed. "That she was different," Ethan admitted, his voice quieter now. "That I could trust her." Marcus leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "And has she done anything to make you think you couldn't trust her? Other than not telling you who her family is?" Ethan hesitated. "She lied, Marcus. She pretended to be someone she wasn't. Did she?" Marcus asked. "Or did she just want a chance to be seen for who she is, without all the baggage her name carries?" Ethan frowned, but Marcus continued before he could respond. "Think about it. Has Anna ever given you a reason to doubt her work? Her integrity? Her loyalty to this team? Because from where I'm standing, she's done nothing but prove herself. If anything, she's gone above and beyond to show she's more than just a name." Ethan leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You're saying I should have just accepted her secret? That I should have ignored the fact that she didn't trust me enough to tell me? I'm saying you need to ask yourself why she felt she couldn't tell you," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "Because from what I've seen, Anna isn't the type to keep secrets for fun. She's smart, yes, but she's not manipulative. If she kept her past from you, There was a reason, and it probably wasn't to hurt you. Ethan stared at Marcus, his mind churning. He wanted to argue, to cling to his anger, but the truth in Marcus's words was impossible to ignore. As the night stretched on, Ethan found himself replaying Anna's final words. You need to ask yourself something. Is this anger about what I did, or about the fact that I got close enough to hurt you? He had spent years building walls, keeping people at a distance to avoid exactly this kind of pain. But with Anna, he had let those walls crack. And now, faced with the fallout, he realized his anger wasn't just about her secret, it was about his own fear. Fear of trusting someone. Fear of being vulnerable. Marcus's voice broke through his thoughts one last time. You're a smart man, Ethan. Don't let your pride make you blind. If you push her away because of this, you'll regret it. Ethan didn't respond, but as Marcus left the room, his words lingered. The glass of whiskey sat untouched on the desk as Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The silence in the room was heavy, but for the first time that night, Ethan didn't feel entirely lost. Because now, amidst the anger and confusion, there was something else, the faint glimmer of clarity. And with it, the realization that if he wanted to make things right, he would have to start by confronting the one person he had been avoiding all along, himself. The morning light filtered through the windows of Anna's new apartment, casting a soft golden glow over the modest space. Gone were the grand halls and polished marble of her family's estate, and gone, too, was the sleek efficiency of Ethan's world. Her new home was smaller, humbler, but it was hers. Anna stood in the center of the room, surrounded by boxes that had yet to be unpacked. She cradled a mug of coffee in her hands, staring out the window at the bustling city below. The sound of distant car horns and the hum of life rose up to meet her, a sharp contrast to the silence she had grown accustomed to in recent days. Her departure from Ethan's world had been swift and final. There had been no drawn-out goodbyes, no lingering moments of what might have been. She had left the mansion that night with her head held high, but the weight in her chest had been unbearable. Now, standing in her new reality, she felt the ache of what she had lost. Ethan's anger, his cold dismissal, it had cut deeper than she cared to admit. But beneath the pain, there was something else. A flicker of resolve. The screen shifted to a series of scenes, a quiet but powerful montage of Anna rebuilding her life. In a sunlit studio, Anna sat before a canvas, her hands streaked with paint. She moved the brush with deliberate strokes, channeling her emotions into bold, sweeping lines. The painting began to take shape, abstract, raw, and deeply personal. It was as if each color she chose, each curve she created, was a piece of her story, a reflection of the pain and growth she was experiencing. Late at night, Anna sat at her desk, her laptop open in front of her. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she poured her thoughts into words. She wasn't writing for anyone else, not yet, but for herself. The words flowed like a confession, a way to process everything she had endured, the weight of her family's expectations, the secrets she had kept, and the heartbreak she was now trying to heal. In a community center, Anna was surrounded by children, their laughter echoing through the room. She knelt beside a young girl, helping her glue pieces of colorful paper onto a craft project. The girl smiled up at her, and Anna smiled back, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was doing something that wasn't tied to expectations or hidden motives. It was just pure, unfiltered kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Anna found herself sitting on her balcony, her sketchpad resting on her lap. She flipped through the pages, each one filled with drawings and notes, a chronicle of her journey since leaving Ethan's world. She had spent so long trying to prove herself, to escape the shadow of her family's name, that she had forgotten what it meant to simply be. Now, for the first time, she felt like she was discovering that person, the woman she truly was, outside of anyone's expectations. Her thoughts wandered to Ethan, unbidden but inevitable. She could still see the look in his eyes that night, the way his anger had masked something deeper, hurt, disappointment, maybe even regret. She wondered if he thought about her now, if he regretted the way things had ended. But she couldn't let herself dwell on it. She had spent too much time defining herself by the people around her, her family, her colleagues, even Ethan. It was time to define herself on her own terms. The montage ended with Anna standing in a gallery, her paintings hung on the walls. People wandered through the space, pausing to admire her work, their expressions thoughtful and moved. One woman approached her, smiling warmly. "Your work is incredible," the woman said. "It's so raw, so honest. You have a gift." Anna thanked her, her heart swelling with pride. It wasn't about the praise, it was about the fact that she had put herself out there, fully and authentically, for the first time. As she walked through the gallery, her steps light and confident, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. Her heart still ached, but it wasn't the crushing weight it had been before. She was healing. She was growing. And for the first time in a long time, Anna felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The office was quiet, the kind of stillness that came late at night when the hustle of the day had long since faded. Ethan sat at his desk, the faint glow of his computer screen illuminating his face. Around him, the evidence of his success was clear: polished awards, framed accolades, and neatly stacked reports detailing the progress of his empire. But tonight, none of it felt satisfying. His eyes flicked to the corner of his desk, where a folder sat, its edges slightly worn from frequent handling. Inside were the contributions Anna had made during her time with him: notes, proposals, reorganized strategies. He hesitated before picking it up, flipping through the pages. It was all there. The logistics plan she had restructured, which had saved them time and money, the creative solutions she'd proposed at critical moments, and the quiet but significant ways she had improved the team's efficiency. Ethan had always been meticulous, priding himself on his ability to analyze people and situations with precision. But as he reviewed Anna's work now, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to see before. She had been more than a team member. She had been instrumental. His grip on the folder tightened as a pang of guilt settled in his chest. He had accused her of manipulation, of using him for her own gain. But the evidence in front of him painted a different picture. Anna had poured herself into the work, not for recognition or approval, but because she genuinely cared about the outcome. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind pulling him back to moments he hadn't fully appreciated at the time. The first meeting, her quiet confidence as she reorganized his chaotic board, not for attention but because it needed to be done. The business dinner, the way she had stepped in without hesitation, turning an embarrassing mistake into an opportunity with nothing more than her wit and composure. Late nights together, the conversations that had lingered in his mind long after they'd ended, her words challenging him in ways no one else ever had. He had pushed her away, convinced that her secret nullified all of it. But now, sitting alone in the dim light, he saw the truth. Anna had made him better. She had challenged him to think differently, to trust someone beyond the narrow circle he kept. She had seen through his carefully constructed facade and treated him not as the untouchable businessman, but as a person. And he had let her go. Marcus's voice echoed in his mind, from the night they had spoken in the study. "You're a smart man, Ethan. Don't let your pride make you blind. If you push her away because of this, you'll regret it." Ethan exhaled sharply, the weight of those words settling over him like a lead blanket. Marcus had been right. His pride, his fear of vulnerability, had clouded his judgment. He thought about Anna's final words to him: "I can't stay here, not if you can't trust me." She had been right, too. He hadn't trusted her, not because she wasn't trustworthy, but because he hadn't let himself believe that someone like her could genuinely care about him. Ethan stood, crossing to the window and staring out at the city's skyline. It was the same view he had looked at countless times, but tonight it felt different. Empty. He had spent so long building walls, keeping people at a distance to protect himself, that he hadn't realized how lonely it had made him. Anna had broken through those walls, not with force, but with quiet persistence. And now she was gone. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he had been avoiding. He cared about Anna. Deeply. It wasn't just her intelligence or her resilience, it was her. The way she looked at him, not with awe or fear, but with understanding. The way she challenged him, not to prove herself, but because she believed he could be better. He couldn't let her slip away. Ethan turned away from the window, his expression resolute. He wasn't a man who gave up easily, and he wasn't about to start now. He grabbed his coat and phone, dialing Marcus as he headed for the door. "Marcus," he said when the call connected, his voice firm. "I need to know where Anna is." There was a pause on the other end before Marcus responded, his tone tinged with satisfaction. "Finally came to your senses, did you?" Ethan didn't answer, but the determination in his silence was answer enough. "I'll send you her address," Marcus said. "But Ethan, make sure you don't mess this up. She deserves more than just an apology." Ethan nodded to himself, his jaw tightening. "I know." As he stepped out into the crisp night air, a single thought drove him forward. He had made a mistake, but he wasn't going to let pride or fear stop him from fixing it. Because if there was one thing Ethan was sure of, it was that Anna was worth fighting for. The grand hall of the charity gala was a vision of elegance. Strings of warm lights crisscrossed the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the room. Guests milled about in their finest attire, champagne flutes in hand, while a soft symphony played in the background. At the center of it all was Anna, poised but understated, her presence commanding attention in the subtlest of ways. She hadn't expected to be here just weeks ago, but her newfound passion for giving back had led her to this moment. The event was to raise funds for art therapy programs, an initiative she had helped spearhead. As she moved from guest to guest, she spoke with genuine conviction, her words reflecting the fire that had reignited in her since leaving Ethan's world. What she didn't expect was to see him walk through the doors. Ethan stood at the entrance, his tall frame cutting a striking figure against the glow of the room. He was dressed impeccably, as always, but there was something different about him tonight. His usual air of impenetrable control was softened, replaced by a quiet determination that seemed to draw every eye in the room. Anna froze, her breath catching in her throat as their gazes locked. The room seemed to fade away, the hum of conversation dimming, until it was just the two of them staring at each other across the crowd. "What is he doing here?" she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan, undeterred by the attention his arrival had garnered, began moving toward her. Guests parted in his wake, their curiosity palpable, but he paid them no mind. His focus was singular on her. When Ethan reached her, he didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for her to speak or ask why he had come. Instead, he addressed her in a voice that was clear and unwavering, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Anna," he began, his eyes never leaving hers. "I owe you an apology. Not just for what I said that night, but for every moment I let my fear and pride stop me from seeing you for who you truly are." Anna blinked, her lips parting as a ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Ethan continued, his voice filled with emotion. "You were right. I didn't trust you. Not because you weren't trustworthy, but because I was too afraid to let you in. You challenged me, pushed me, and made me better, and instead of appreciating that, I let my own insecurities get in the way." He took a step closer, his expression softening. "I've spent weeks replaying every moment we shared, every word you said, and I've realized something. I was an idiot. An idiot for doubting you, for letting you walk away, and for not telling you how much you mean to me." Anna's breath hitched, her heart racing as she searched his face for any hint of insincerity. But there was none. He was bearing himself completely, something she had never thought she'd see from him. "You are brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than anyone I've ever met," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm standing here tonight in front of everyone to tell you that I see you, Anna. Not your name, not your past, you." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "I was wrong to let you go," Ethan finished, his voice steady, but filled with vulnerability. "And I'm asking for a second chance, not just to work with you, but to be with you. Because I don't want to imagine a future where you're not in it." For a long moment, Anna said nothing, her emotions swirling too fast to process. The crowd watched in stunned silence, waiting for her response. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. "Ethan, you hurt me. You made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I had to prove myself over and over just to earn your trust." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "I know. And I'll spend every day making it up to you if you'll let me. But I also know I can't take back what I said. All I can do is show you that I'm willing to change, that I'm willing to be the man who deserves you." Anna's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her resolve wavering as the sincerity in his words broke through the walls she had built around her heart. "I don't know if it's that simple," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It's not," Ethan agreed. "But nothing worth having ever is. And you're worth it, Anna. You've always been worth it." Anna looked around, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes watching them. For a brief moment, she considered walking away, retreating to the safety of her new life. But then she looked back at Ethan, the man who had hurt her, yes, but who was now standing in front of her, vulnerable and unguarded, asking for another chance. And in that moment, she realized she wanted to try. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "This doesn't mean I've forgiven you," she said. "I don't expect you to," Ethan replied, a faint smile breaking through his tension. "But I'll earn it, Anna. I promise." The room erupted into soft applause as Anna nodded, her lips curving into a tentative smile. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in weeks, Anna felt a flicker of hope. As Ethan extended his hand, she hesitated for only a moment before taking it, her heart pounding as they walked forward together into whatever came next. The soft hum of the waves echoed around them as Anna stood on the balcony of her new gallery, the ocean breeze ruffling her hair. The grand opening had been a success. Her paintings, a reflection of her journey, had been met with praise, and the proceeds from the night were set to fund the very art therapy program she had championed. But despite the accomplishment, her mind was elsewhere. Specifically, on the man standing just a few steps behind her. Ethan had been there all evening, quietly supporting her from the sidelines. He hadn't overstepped or tried to insert himself into her moment, but his presence had been undeniable. He had kept his word, giving her the time and space she needed, but tonight, it was clear he wasn't going to leave without an answer. "Beautiful night," he said, breaking the silence. Anna turned to face him, her arms crossed but her expression softened. "It is," she replied. They stood there for a moment, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Finally, Ethan stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, his expression open and unguarded in a way Anna rarely saw. "I meant what I said at the gala," he began, his voice low but steady. "I know I hurt you, and I know I can't erase that. But Anna, I'm here because I'm not giving up on us. Not until I've done everything I can to show you how much you mean to me." Anna studied him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. "Ethan," she said softly, "it's not just about what you said. It's about trust. About believing in me, in who I am, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard." Ethan nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know. And you're right. I didn't trust you the way I should have. I let my own fears cloud everything, and I took it out on you. But Anna, you've taught me something no one else ever has. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That letting someone in doesn't mean losing control. It means finding someone worth sharing it with." Her breath hitched, her resolve wavering as he continued. "You're not just someone I care about, Anna. You're the person who challenges me, who makes me better, who sees through all the walls I've spent years building. I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want to be the man who pushes people away. I want to be the man who stands by your side, not as your protector, but as your partner. Your equal." The words broke through her defenses, the sincerity in his voice leaving no room for doubt. "I don't need grand gestures," Anna said, her voice trembling. "I don't need perfection. I just need to know that when things get hard, you won't run. That you'll fight for us, for me." "I will," Ethan promised, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "Every single day, I will." Tears welled in Anna's eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of hope. "I believe you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his shoulders relaxing as a smile broke across his face. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle, and when she didn't pull away, he laced his fingers with hers. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, casting its warm light on the studio where Ethan and Anna now stood side by side. The room was filled with canvases, sketches, and plans for new projects, not just Anna's, but theirs. Ethan leaned over a table, reviewing a proposal for expanding the art therapy program, while Anna worked on a new piece nearby, her brush moving with quiet purpose. "You're serious about this?" she asked, glancing at him with a teasing smile. "Dead serious," he replied, looking up from the papers. "You're not the only one who can do something meaningful, you know." Anna laughed, the sound light and free, and Ethan couldn't help but smile. They were equals now, not just in love, but in every way that mattered. They challenged each other, supported each other, and built something together that was stronger than anything they could have done alone. As the camera pulled back, showing the two of them surrounded by the fruits of their labor, Ethan stepped behind Anna, wrapping his arms around her waist as she worked. She leaned into him, her smile soft but full of contentment. For the first time, neither of them felt the need to run or hide. They had found their place in each other and in the life they were building together. And as the scene faded to black, their laughter echoed in the background, a perfect harmony of two souls finally at peace.